I'm so happy to be here. So I am the founder and executive director of Awaken Pittsburgh, as Christina mentioned, and just to give you a tiny little glimpse of what we do in a second here. We'll go through that and we'll talk about how to use mindfulness for yourselves and for your kiddos. But because it is a mindfulness presentation, I thought it would be great to get us started with just a little bit of practice. And this practice I like to call anchoring attention. And basically what I would invite you to do to get us started here is to just come into a position that feels relaxed but upright, whatever that means for you in this moment. So we don't want to fall asleep when we do our practices, so that's why we try to be maybe in a seated or upright position if that's possible for you. If you are reclining, that's fine too, if that's the best position for you, but something that maybe feels a little dignified for you. And I would just invite you to bring something to mind that brings you a sense of joy or gratitude, security, or even calm. So it could be a place, a person, a pet, maybe it's the smell of your morning coffee or tea, whatever thing that comes to mind that brings you a sense of joy, gratitude, or calm. And you can really just notice what that is like. What does it look like, feel like, smell like? If it's a person, what do they look like? And then taking a moment to just notice how bringing that person, place, or thing to mind, how does that make you feel? What do you notice in your body or your mind as you put your attention on this thing that brings you joy? So we just rest our attention there on the thing that brings us joy, really imagining it fully for just a moment more. And if by chance your mind wanders to something else, I just invite you to come back to that thing with your attention for just a moment more, and then I will bring a chime to bring us back into the presentation. Thank you so much for engaging in that beginning practice with us. This anchoring attention practice is very foundational to mindfulness. We always help people find an anchor for their attention. So for that moments of high stress or deregulation for you or for your kiddos, if you have practiced in a moment that's calm, finding that anchor for your attention that brings you joy or calms you, then in moments when you're really stressed out or something's very emotionally triggering, you can more easily bring that to mind and shift your emotional state. So I thought we would start with that practice just as an example of something to do more regularly that then you can call upon in moments of distress or stress. So moving right along, let's go into a little bit of what Awaken Pittsburgh does. Who are we, right? Who are we? And so just to give you a glimpse of our mission, we promote personal and community well-being through mindfulness programs and compassionate actions. And what does that actually look like? We work with all kinds of groups of folks. We have open programming, and a little later we'll be sharing a link in case you're interested in participating in one of our upcoming programs. But we also do programs based in organizations like businesses for workplace wellness, schools, therapeutic organizations. We've been working with family centers that serve families with pre-K kids, all those kinds of helping and caring and service organizations to help the care providers, including families, kind of recharge their batteries and get tools and skills to help them do the best that they can and self-regulate. We know that people working in service, whether that's as a family care provider or as a care provider in an institution or organization, often suffer secondary trauma or compassion fatigue. That's real, right? We get burnout. And so the practices that we present are something that support working with that secondary trauma or compassion fatigue. And we'll talk a little bit more about how that relates to being a parent of a kiddo with special needs. So, you know, part of our mission then is mindfulness programming. So what exactly is mindfulness? This is my favorite definition. You might find a few that are a little different, but this is mine, if I can get it to show up. There it is. So it's paying attention to what's happening right now, including mental events, and bringing a kind of attitude to that paying attention, which would be an attitude of curiosity, of openness, and acceptance. And so if you think back to the opening practice that we did, I said, bring to mind something that brings you joy or that you feel gratitude for, person, place, or thing. And then I asked you to kind of rest attention with curiosity, exploring what that thing is, what it looks like, smells like, tastes like, etc. And then I asked you that if thoughts came up, to just notice them and return your attention. And so that's the openness, that we're not trying to push away or stuff down anything. We're noticing everything, and we're just kind of recognizing what's there and bringing that openness and acceptance. And just to say that acceptance there does not mean a moral judgment. Acceptance is more like, oh, this is really happening. So the opposite of denial, right? But we don't necessarily have to judge it and say it's good or bad. We can just kind of notice what's there. So hopefully that makes sense for people. And as was mentioned, you can be populating the Q&A or the chat with questions. And I'll be happy to answer any questions that come up for you as we go along. We'll pause a couple times to do that. So I really want to just validate for you that the stress of people who are caring for folks that are children that are special ed, right, is way higher than for other populations. And so families who are caregivers for folks that are special ed have higher rates of depression, divorce, economic hardship, and the care providers or educators have higher rates of turnover. They have higher rates of burnout, stress, and anxiety. So I just really want to validate for you all, like this is real and impacts your life day to day. And I want to also say that although it is not a panacea, it's not going to fix everything and make it go away. What we do know is that mindfulness does have some benefits to reduce the distress in parents, caregivers, and educators. It does have the effect of having enhanced positive psychological functioning, and then more self-compassion and personal growth over time, right? We also see that how we show up in our relationship has an increase in empathy and a positive impact. And I'll just tell you one little story of a research project that was done on care providers for profoundly disabled students. So students who, or children who had no verbal ability, right? So that the indicators of them being happy were, you know, less kind of reactivity and negative responses or more smiling. Like that was the indicators. And what they did was they put folks who were care providers, parents and hired care providers, in two groups. One was getting mindfulness and one was not. And they measured the level of happiness of the children they supported. And the folks with the mindfulness intervention had statistically significantly more happier kiddos, right? So smiling more, less indicators of distress in the kids. The only thing they had that was different was the mindfulness intervention. So I'm supporting you all in understanding that mindfulness for you is really important, not only just for the kiddos, that you will have calmer, happier kiddos if you're practicing. And why is this the case? Well, stress of any kind can push us into fight, flight, and freeze mode. In the past, this was, you know, the big tiger or saber-toothed tiger that we see in the picture, right? That when we would see the danger, our physical response would help us get out of there or stand our ground and fight. And right now in our lives, we may not have these actual animals attacking us or life-threatening situations, but the stressors of our daily life kick that response in just the same. The difference is when it's an interpersonal interaction or accumulation of just feeling overwhelmed that's kicking that response in, we don't have the release of the running and the fighting to get that cortisol and adrenaline out of our system. So what ends up happening is that builds up over time in our bodies, right? And can cause negative effects. In the short term, so that's the long-term effect. In the short term, it pushes us out of what's called our window of tolerance. And so just to kind of give you a little brief introduction, if you're not aware of the window of tolerance, this was something designed by Dan Siegel to help us understand trauma and stress response. So when we're feeling self-regulated, when everything is going well, we are in our emotional comfort zone, which is this kind of middle yellow box that you see on your screen. And that means that we can soothe ourselves, we can self-regulate, we're not flying off the handle, and we're not dissociating. When that fight-flight response gets kicked in, right, something triggers us emotionally. Maybe we get hyper-aroused, which means we get super-duper angry. We may feel really overwhelmed. We can have outbursts, right? If you can kind of read that pink section up there. The other thing is, sorry, this is the joy of working from home. You hear my dog is. You know, we can be pushed out of that window where it's our comfort zone and pushed into kind of hyperactive overdrive mode. For some people, the way that we respond in those high stress situations is we kind of dissociate, and that's called hypoarousal, and that's our freeze response, right? So in the case of the big tiger, we kind of hide behind the tree or the rock, and we hope we're in the cave, and we just stay there like, you know, still as a statue so that they pass by and don't mess with us. But in our life, that might look like you're just not present, you're emotionally shut down or detached, right? It's kind of the playing possum, right? The freeze response. So that's hypoarousal. And so we can see in our kind of graphic here that in the window of tolerance, mindfulness and grounding exercises and techniques are actually something we can use to get us back into that comfort. So this is how we de-escalate ourselves and how we de-escalate our kiddos. So I'm just going to pause there and check in because that was a lot of quick information, and just see, is there anyone that has a question about the practice we did, the definition of mindfulness, the window of tolerance, anything like that at all? And then, you know, we can talk through those. And then the next part of the program, just to let you know, is we're going to move into what are the practices we can do for ourselves, what are the practices we can start to do with our kiddos to keep us all in the window of tolerance. So just a pause to see, do you have any questions so far?
You can feel free to ask your questions in chat, or if you prefer, you can ask your questions in the Q&A. So someone is mentioning that they don't particularly have a question, but they do have a young adult who has bipolar and some anger challenges.
Mm-hmm. Right. And so, you know, this is, everyone is unique. Some people get pushed out of that window very easily, and other people stay in the window, are able to self-regulate, you know, more and more. And so the idea is that by bringing in mindfulness practices when we're not escalated, as I mentioned before, that we build that kind of neural pathway or mental muscle so that when we are starting to escalate, we can then bring it back into the comfort zone or the window of tolerance more easily. And for some people, that's more difficult than others. And so folks with a diagnosis that might include more reactive states, then they're going to maybe need a little more practice. It might be a little more intensive, for sure, but still possible.
So there's a question about, does this window differ from culture? From
Oh, from
persons,
culture
different
to
cultures?
culture? Yeah, I think for me, I'm not an expert on how it relates to the culture. I think all humans work in the same way with just our emotional reactions. I think the difference is what is culturally appropriate expressions of emotion, right? So, in some cultures, maybe yelling or a loud expression of anger is more appropriate than in other cultures where that's totally not appropriate. So I think the expression is slightly different. What's actually considered kind of totally out, but I think the way that we respond and feeling out of control or feeling completely shut down, that's a just total human experience. I hope that answered the question.
Thank you.
Yeah. Any last questions, maybe even about the definition of mindfulness or the original practice? We'll just take one more second here to make sure we answer them all, and then I'll move into some sets of practices that we can talk through.
That's all we have for now.
Okay, great. So again, just to kind of wrap up here, it is not wrong to get pushed out of our window of tolerance, right? This is our kind of body telling us and our emotions telling us something's going on in our environment, right? So getting angry is not a bad thing. Feeling shut down is not a bad thing. So just to let you know, it's not a judgment here. If this happens to you, it's nothing to be embarrassed about or for you to be angry with your kiddos about. It's just to notice that we're no longer in that comfort zone. And so our responses in that moment are not going to be the most rational. Sometimes when we get pushed out of the window, we enter into an area of black and white thinking. So we're not seeing as clearly. We're kind of more responding from a fear-based place as opposed to a calm, centered place. And we know when we get our fear really triggered and kicked up, our rational thinking mind is not engaged, right? It's just not engaged. And just to kind of give you an example that you could use with kiddos, and you can always Google this, there's so many things on the internet. Dan Siegel also uses something called the hand model of the brain. And so just to give you a little biological explanation of what's actually going on, this is like you can imagine, this is my brain, right? So this is the front of my brain. This is the brain stem coming down into the spinal cord, right? So this is what the brain looks like. And in here, this is the limbic system. This part of the brain is sometimes called the reptilian brain. It's the oldest developmentally in evolutionary terms, oldest part of the brain. And so this is what is our emotional reactivity center, right? This is our emotions. This part of the brain, which is on the front, like my forehead, it's called the prefrontal cortex. This part of the brain is our rational thinking mind. And literally what happens is when we get pushed out of that comfort zone, when we get pushed out of the window of tolerance, the critical thinking mind, the analysis part, the ability to make logical decisions stops talking to the limbic system, which is controlling the emotional reaction, which puts us into fight, flight, or freeze. And so you can't engage. And we show kids this model and we say, what happens is you flip your lid so that this prefrontal cortex, the logical thinking mind, is no longer talking to this part of the brain that is regulating emotion. And what we need to do is we need to push that back down. We need to get them to talk again so that we can actually start to think through problems, right? This is really key. However, if you're fully flipped, boy, it's really hard to get it to go back down. So part of the key here is, can we start to notice at the beginning? And so when I work with teachers that have special ed populations, what we work with is, again, building those practices up so that they're habituated, so that when we notice that it's just starting to flip, we can cue a practice to keep the lid on. So hopefully that was a little bit helpful neurological explanation, neurophysiological explanation for you. And so what are the practices? So let's jump into that. So we have these two extremes: hypoarousal, which is when you're shut down, disconnected, tuned out, sometimes called dissociation, depending on how it's manifesting, and then hyperarousal, where we're completely hyper, bouncing off the walls kind of experience, right? And so hypoarousal, since you're kind of down, shut down, not engaged, right? The idea is you want to up-regulate. So if you notice a kiddo, or if you see that your kiddo has this as a tendency, this kinds of their go-to response, movement practices are great. Just standing up, you know, and moving, and also body tapping. So we're gonna do a couple of different practices together, and I know that you're not all on video for me, so I'm gonna invite you to do them alongside me and just trust that you're doing it with me. So the first one that we're gonna do is called swaying trees, and it's a great practice to do, and little kids love it, but big kids, you don't have to actually, older kids, you don't have to call it swaying trees. You can actually just have them do the movement practice. It actually feels great. And so basically, you have kids just use their arms like a tree, and you just have them sway. So if everyone would just try it, and you can keep your feet on the floor, and then you can have the kids, you know, just decide how windy it is. You know, is it a hurricane? Is that what it's feeling like? Or is it a light breeze? So that's swaying trees, and that's a movement practice, especially with the younger kids. If your kiddo is shutting down, and they, you know, usually young kids like to move. If a kid is wheelchair bound and has limited mobility, whatever that movement looks like for them, you know, it could just be seated with the arms, right? Whatever that looks like. And if they have very limited mobility, it could just be torso or head. So whatever amount of movement that a person can do is absolutely fine. The other thing that is great for upregulating is body tapping. And so just to say that popping out of your window of tolerance means you're not fully in the present moment anymore. You're not fully able to pay attention to actually what's happening because you've been shoved out of the ability to do that. And so physical sensations, any sensory perception is actually something that can help bring us back into the present moment. And so body tapping is one way to just bring us in. So I'm just going to give you this example from my seated chair. So just light tapping, just light tapping. So if you want to just give it a try, just light tapping down your legs, right? Just light body tapping. And so feeling dysregulated, starting to drift away, just something to wake you up, bring you back into the moment. Okay. So those are just two examples, a movement practice and body tapping that can just bring us back. If we're hypo-aroused, again, that means we're shutting down, we're dissociated, we're not fully present. We've all seen that in someone, they just glaze over, right? Just glaze over. So if that's what's going on, this is what you can do. Great. So then the other side of the continuum of arousal is hyper-aroused, right? So that was at the top of our graphic. And this means you're just starting to freak out, right? You're having an anger outburst happen. You are, maybe a panic attack is happening. Heart is beating crazy, you know, anything like that, hyper arousal, right? So here, instead of upregulating, we don't want to be jumping around and escalating. We want to be calming, soothing. And so this is where that anchor that we did at the beginning, thinking of something that feels really calming and soothing, right? And some folks are going to be able to just imagine it and start to get there. The other thing that is really helpful is a breath technique. And so we're going to try a breath technique together right now. I'm going to guide it for a few minutes to give us that. The thing that I recommend for kids is breathing in conjunction with a body. And so we're going to do something called finger breathing. And so you just have kids hold out one hand and then take the index finger of the other hand, and they're going to trace the fingers as they breathe in and out. And so I'll just start with the example. You can watch for a second, and then we'll do it all together. So breathing in, going up the side of the thumb, breathing out. And then you just keep going, right? You can go all the way to the end, and then you can come back. I think 10 is a good number of breaths to start to regulate. So let's try that. So again, just tracing as you breathe. Inhale up the one side, exhale down the other side. Great. I don't know if your breathing rate is the same as mine, but hopefully you got through 10. And actually just doing that with you, I have felt myself just, little nerves from presenting. I felt myself just settle. The other one that I want to give you is another breathing technique is breath counting. And this is actually 2 ways you can do it. The first one is just simply count your breathing. Don't manipulate the breathing in any way. Just count your breathing. So let's all just take a minute and we're going to inhale, exhale, count 1. Inhale, exhale, count 2. And let's just get to 5 or 6. So wherever you go, depending on your breath rate. So taking a moment to just count our breathing. So I'm on 2. The whole cycle of breathing. Inhale, exhale 3. Great. So I got to 5. However, you're breathing, you may have gotten to a different number. And if you get distracted, or if the kiddo gets distracted, like I do 1, 2, and then I start thinking about something, I lose track of where I'm at, you just start again with 1 and see if you can get to 5. That's it. The other way to do breath counting is actually a technique that is used to help people that have high blood pressure. If you've ever heard of biofeedback, this is a technique that was taught or is taught in biofeedback techniques. It's actually really proven to lower your heart rate and blood pressure. And that is extending the exhale longer than the inhale. So you can count how long it takes you to breathe in, and then about 50% longer on the exhale. So just as an example, I sometimes call this 7-11 breathing. So if my inhale count was 7, then my exhale count would be 11. And I want to just keep that exhale longer than the inhale. So let's all try 7-11, or extending the exhale for just a minute. Let's just try that. So breathing in fully and completely, and counting it, seeing how long it takes you to breathe in, so whatever number you got to, and then adding 50%. So if you got to 6, try 9 on the exhale. Let's just try that for a minute. Great. So that was extending the exhale, or another way of counting your breath, right? And then the last kind of grounding technique that I want to give you is just called feet on the floor. And so people do all different ways of just getting the person who is hyper-aroused to just bring them back into the present moment. And that could be naming things they see and hear in the room, right? I see in my room a television behind me, a door behind me, I see brown wood. Name 5 things in the room. The other thing is notice what's happening in your body by focusing on your feet on the floor, okay? So everyone just take a moment and really feel what it feels like to have your feet on the floor. So if you're wearing shoes, that will be interacting with the floor, right? There's something in between your actual feet on the floor, or socks. If you're barefoot, because we're all home maybe, you know, feeling how that feels. Is there carpet? Is it a wood floor, a tile floor? So just really exploring, what do you feel? What's the temperature? Is there a sense of weight or texture? So really thinking about, and if you were doing this with a young person or a child, you could have them talk it out. What do you notice? Okay, so just to kind of review what we just did, hypoarousal, someone's dissociating, shutting down, get them up and moving, doing some kind of a full body movement as much as someone's able is great, right? And just body tapping. Just body tapping is another way to kind of wake us up, bring us back, right? For hyperarousal, when that fight flight reaction is really starting to kick in, we don't want to upregulate, we want to downregulate. And so what's going to be soothing? And that could be bringing to mind that anchor of attention that we had at our beginning practice. That could also be breathing techniques that involve the body, like the finger breathing we just did, and it's just breathing in as we go up, breathing out as we go down. And I recommend, you could do just one hand, 5, but 10 is a good number. Breath counting, again, just breathing until we get to number 5, counting the inhale and exhale 1, right? So that was that. The other one I showed you was the 7-11 breathing, which is extending the exhale, and then feet on the floor. So I'm gonna pause there again and just ask for any questions about the regulation techniques I just went over. I know it's a lot, but I'm just hoping there's one that you liked in each that you'll kind of remember and hold on to. And I saw that in the chat, there's some videos available for those. They're great. And a lot of this is online. And actually, there's some on our website as well. So anything, questions coming up for people around practices to keep us in our window of tolerance?
We have 2 questions right now. Again, you can ask questions in the chat or in the questions box. So first question, does it matter how we breathe? Like, is there like, oh wait, should we breathe in through the mouth and exhale through the nose?
Yeah, so sometimes people have like breathe in the nose and exhale the mouth. I just, your regular breathing is great. And so you can see the important thing is the attentional quality, right? So we're really paying attention to the body and the breath. We're really noticing as we trace for this one. For the counting, the important part of that one is, for example, extending that exhale. That's the thing that's going to bring you down. So the nose, mouth, like I don't think in this case is really, really important, but that's a great question. People often ask that. Regular breathing, we're regularly breathing. We're not really manipulating or doing anything like that, except that extending the exhale.
I love that. That makes it so much more accessible for me. I'm always really focused on remembering, oh, breathe in this way, breathe out that way. So that makes it really accessible. Thank you.
Keep it simple.
So another question, and this I'm sure is really going to be something our so many of our audience members can connect with. How do you handle when your child speeds through these exercises because they're already escalated? We try and catch it before it gets there, but often it feels like it goes from 0 to 60.
Yeah. So if they're really hyper escalated, you know, let's just say we do the finger breathing and they still seem jittery, they still seem, then try another one. Say, okay, great, thanks so much for trying that. Is there something else for you? And I always ask the kiddo, right? What do you want to try? What's your favorite thing? And if you're experimenting with these regularly when the kid is calm, you may know which one they're like, oh, I really like that. Like finger breathing, I think most kids love that, but there are a few kids, they don't like it, right? Some of them love the breath counting, some don't. And I guess I'll just mention there, if you have a, excuse me, a pre-K kiddo, they can't count yet. And it's hard to get them to focus on the way the body is breathing. What I do with that age group is I take a favorite toy or stuffed animal, not too big. I don't have one handy. I'm looking around. I didn't set one next to me. But basically, lay them down, place it on their belly, and have them watch the up and down of the animal as they're breathing, and ask them if they can slow it down. can they slow it? Because what you want to do, like we get escalated and we're breathing more shallowly and we're breathing more rapidly. And so what we want to see is the kids pulling the air down into their belly and they're slowing it down. And so that's just a great way for the pre-K or pre-counting age group. But I've seen that it works up through early elementary because they're focused on the visual cue, which is the sensory, right? And they can see how fast they're breathing, right? And that helps them also kind of notice the body, right? If you have a kid that's a little developmentally delayed, that might also be a great thing if they're even a little bit older. But I would say the thing that might help in a really escalated kiddo is what's their favorite thing? What do they like? Which practice do they like, right? And appeal to that. More sensory-based things are going to be more helpful. So as I mentioned, naming 5 things that you see, naming the way the feet on the floor feel, those sensory-based things are really a way to bring them back, and then maybe do the breathing. So you may need a couple, but knowing what the kid loves and is willing to engage in is sometimes the key, because if they're already really escalated, the willingness is going to be the issue, I find, right? So you want to know what they love. The other thing that I've gotten for some of my kiddos to work with is you can buy them, they have it on Amazon or Etsy, and I think they're like $9, little wooden finger labyrinths that you trace, right? It's a little labyrinth, it's like a maze design, and it's got a raised surface. I think they have them clay too, but the ones that I've gotten are wood. They don't break. You just trace it. And some kids find this like amazingly fascinating to do and just, so soothing and so calming. That's the hyper arousal again. We wouldn't do that with a dissociated state because it's downregulating. I hope I answered that question, but finding the thing they're willing to do and they like to do and will stick with, I think that's the key. And that's why you really need to do the practices, not just in the moment of escalation. You need to be doing it, prior when everyone's calm. There are also so many great kids books out there right now that help introduce to especially the younger elementary and pre-K. And I'm thinking of one that just came to mind when that real escalated situation, Lemonade Hurricane. The pre-K and kindergarten teachers and early elementary teachers that I work with said the kids love that one, Lemonade Hurricane. And it's about that just explosive state, right? And so giving them language to talk about it too is really, really helpful. I'm hoping that that's helping.
Yes, thank you. And I think that you had already mentioned this, but I think it definitely bears repeating. We got a question. Should we be practicing these techniques with our children when they're calm so they aren't encountering them the first time when they're out of their window?
Right. Exactly. That is actually the key. And so we know now, just because of the state of our research, that it's just like playing a musical instrument or practicing a sport. You're not going to just go into the big game and succeed. You have to have all that repetition to have the pathway there and knowing how to do it. And what I've found with practice over time is the more I practice, when I do get out of my window, the easier it is to bring myself back down because my pathway of calm engagement has been built up. And some of us naturally have that pathway of calm engagement, and some of us just don't have it. We need to actually build it. And that's that ability to put the lid back down, right? Some of us, that's easier. And for other of us, like for whatever reason in our biophysiology, it's much more difficult. And so we need to build it. And it's a skill and we can learn it. And so that's the good part of it, right? This is a skill. We can get better at it. Right? But for some of us, it comes naturally, and some of us, it really doesn't.
So here's the situation I think we can all empathize with. How effective are these techniques if a child is having a meltdown in public?
Yeah. So the public thing, woo, we've all been there as parents. We have all been there as parents. Self-soothing. So what's going to soothe that kiddo, right? That's the thing that you're gonna have to, as the care provider, what's the thing that soothes them? Is it a image that they can think of, that happy place, right? What is the thing that is self-soothing to that kiddo? And so whether it's public or in a private situation, that really extreme escalation. And that's why I started with that anchoring practice, because you can talk a kiddo through that in a calm moment. What's the thing that makes you the happiest? Is there a person, or maybe it's a pet, that always makes you feel happy and calm? And just talk it through them. And so what you can help kids explore is that our minds have the ability to shift our emotional state. And so when we do our classes, we do some experiments with this with our participants, but bringing something to mind that makes us sad, like we can do that, right? If you think of something right now, maybe you've had, I don't know, I don't want to make you all sad, so I'm hesitating to do this. But we know, like, when we bring certain things to mind, our emotions are going to change. When we bring things that are joyful or that we're grateful for to mind, we lift our own mood, or even music, right? So having that ability to self-soothe and working with that with our kiddos, so that in those moments when we're in the store and we just said, no, you can't have that, and they lose it. We've all had this happen, or they're just overtired, right? Or whatever the trigger is. What's the thing that self-soothes them? And so we need to identify that ahead of time so we can help kick that in, or the practice that works for them, and it may mean, carrying around that item that is the thing that helps them. Like, I'm just thinking, I mentioned those labyrinths, or I call them breathing buddies, whatever it is that becomes the little toy that you put on the belly. Something can cue the ability, and it is cueing, right? It's cueing in that emotional state, but it only works with repetition. It only works with repetition when the person is calm. Yeah.
I love that reminder. That's fantastic. We have another question. Any techniques that would help a child who struggles with waking up and getting ready in the morning?
Yeah, so that is an upregulation problem, right? So sleepy, not awake yet, that's an upregulation problem. I love dance. So if that kiddo loves to dance, what if there's a favorite song and you have your morning dance, that's the way you wake up? I think kiddos, especially younger kiddos, love music and dance. So I don't know if that kid is one that would love that, but anything to get them up and moving, and then that gets kind of the energy level up and regulating. The other thing that I think really, really helps is, we all know positive reinforcement. So once we're up and moving, right? Once we're up and moving, what's that thing they love? What's the thing they love and I'm talking about emotional, self-soothing kinds of things. What feels better to them? Is there a thing we can do? We're gonna sing that song that makes you happy during breakfast, or, but the idea is that sleepiness is a hypoarousal state. That's one of the symptoms of hypoarousal. So upping it, movement, energy, what's going to bring energy to that kiddo, and what do they love about that? Is there something they love? And if it's like, especially younger kids, you can even use their imagination. Like, they love baseball, and so we're gonna pretend baseball, or we're gonna pretend whatever it is to get us moving in the morning. Using imagination with the littler kids especially is really wonderful, because they will engage with that. Other questions?
Thank you. Yeah, that's all we have right now.
Okay, great. So let's shift to like I've been saying, you should practice, you should practice, you should practice. Where do you start, right? Where do you start? For families, I really, really, really want parents and care providers to do your own practice, right? You be doing it on your own, because what happens with me sometimes is when the other person escalates, I escalate. And if I'm escalating, right, because I'm getting triggered by them being triggered, I'm not able to help them self-regulate. And then it becomes this really horrible vicious cycle that we get stuck in. And so we kind of have to be up on our game. And that means we need to be self-care. Our self-care has to be really, really up, right? We really need to be walking the walk, I guess, not just talking the talk to the kids. And so I would encourage you all to just begin with your own practice, right? What could that look like? That anchoring practice that we did at the beginning, that's a great one. And just find 5 minutes every day. Just 5 minutes, start with that. And then maybe after a couple of weeks, move it to 10, if you're able. But the research now is saying it's not the case that you need to find 2 or 3 hours or even an hour. You don't. The regularity of the practice is actually more important than trying to get a whole long time, right? So 5 minutes a day, and if you can do that 4 to 5 times a week, fantastic. And there are all kinds of online supports right now that are available to you. If you just Google meditation or mindfulness practices, you will find a ton. I would say, please don't pay for anything. There's so much out there for free. My favorite is the Insight meditation timer. I have it on my phone. It works on every platform. You can put it on the computer. And what it basically gives you is it'll ring a chime at the beginning, like you set it for 5 minutes or 10 minutes, and then it'll ring a chime at the end, so you don't have to be looking at the clock, right? The other thing that it has is if you thought it was really helpful to have me guiding the practice and kind of leading, like that first practice that we did, it has guided practices. So you can put in any kind of topic, or you can put in a length of time, and you can say, I have 5 minutes, give me a guided practice, and it will guide you. So Insight meditation timer, or just Googling online. I always tell people, you don't need to pay anything. You don't need any special equipment. You don't need fancy anything. Sitting in a chair using a free app. That's all you need. As we're coming back from COVID, there are, I don't know where folks are all coming from. I'm in the Pittsburgh area. There are in-person supports that are available. There is a sign up for our newsletter and we have resources on our website. So that's always an option, awakenpittsburgh.org, straight there forward. And then the other thing to do, and you can do this with your kiddos, is pick an activity that you can try to do fully mindfully. And so I'm just going to use brushing our teeth as an example. Some years ago, I had a dentist tell me that I was not brushing my teeth correctly, and he could tell by my gums. And I kind of had a little attitude, like, I've been brushing my teeth this way for 40 years. What do you mean it's not right? Like, what does that even mean? And he said, you're doing saw, 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 and you need to be doing little circles, little circles, little circles. Well, imagine the quality of attention that I put on how I was brushing my teeth that day when I got home, that evening. And he was right. I automatically started doing saw, saw, saw. And so I had to shift my way of brushing my teeth. And when you have to change those automatic habits, you start to pay attention in a whole new way. So I would invite everyone, maybe if you have one of those electric spinny brushes, it might not be as easy to do, but take a moment when you're brushing your teeth tonight and just notice how you do it. Are you doing little circles, little circles, little circles? Or are you doing saw, saw, saw? And the thing to notice is the quality of the attention. And so that's the thing that makes it a mindful activity. Do you have full attention in the present moment, or your mind is totally somewhere else? Are you judging, right? Or are you open and curious? So that's the difference. You could also use chopping food as you prepare a meal, and you can invite kids to try to bring a mindfulness to that as well. So that's another way to just automatically integrate practice into what you're already doing in your day, every day. And then shifting to the kiddos, again, what if you invite your child to do a practice with you every day? And you can do videos. There's all kinds of videos available, or you can just kind of talk it through with them, just a few minutes every day. One of the ones I love to suggest to families is mindful eating. So when we're sitting down for a meal, instead of just launching into the meal, everyone just very slowly takes a bite or two, puts the utensil down, or if it's a sandwich, sets it down, and just really notices the food and the way it tastes, and then checks in about it. What did that taste like, right? And I do this often with kids with a piece of chocolate, right? And we can also talk about, where did the food come from? Whatever you wanted to do to bring our full awareness into the eating. So, but again, the key, as daily as possible, as regularly as possible, but it doesn't have to be a long time, 5 minutes, that's it. That's really it.
So we have a question. Do you have any tips for integrating this with the teen who is hypo more than hyper? Yeah.
Is there anything, I guess I would just ask, is there any physical activity that teen likes? Like, is there a physical something that the kiddo likes, that you could start to cue, you know, when they're really shutting down, right? When they're really shutting down. And if there isn't, if it's not something physical that could upregulate, the sensory perception kinds of things, the tapping, but also even maybe, you know, I'm not sure the labyrinth would be, because I feel like kids could kind of drift off with that as well. Like, you don't want something that they can dissociate more. You want something to really wake them up. I would say, you know, even a shower, you know, with that moment, anything that's going to make them wake up, and everybody's different. And so it's really going to be what they love, right? What they love. Although, let me mention, sorry, I'm looking up at my shelf. There's this really wonderful for teens. We used it with a group at one of the local high schools. It's called the Self-Compassion Workbook for Teens, right? And it really works on helping them work with self-criticism, build self-esteem, insecurity, and we love this book, and we use it with kiddos, teens, and so maybe working through something like that with the kiddo would be wonderful, or even just giving it to them. And but I really like the dialogue of what's working for them is so important, so that when you notice that they're starting to go in a certain direction, you can be like, hey, you seem a little distracted, or you seem a little down. Is there something that we can do to help bring you back? The other thing I would just say, like, coming from a trauma-informed lens, is, you know, I'm really kind of emphasizing making the kid the driver. And if a kid says, I don't like that, whatever the practice is, then be like, oh, okay, that's great to notice. Let's try something else, right? So it's not that we give up, but we allow them to choose, because maybe it's even triggering them worse. Like, you just don't know what's happening inside that person. So really letting the kiddo be the driver and choosing. I hope that was helpful. But the Self-Compassion Workbook for Teens is one of my favorite resources for teenagers.